Morning, Mr. Sofrin. Welcome to the Hey. It's the eve of Chamisha Achar Rishvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon, New Year for the trees. And it's interesting that this falls in the center, according to the opinion of Beis Hillel anyway, it falls right in the center of the month of Shvat. So obviously it has a connection with the month of Shvat per se. And according to Beis Shammai, New Year for the trees is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. According to Beis Hillel, it's Chamisha Achar Rishvat, but whichever way you slice the pie, it's in the month of Shvat. So I just mentioned in short that the 2 months of Shvat and Adar, so go back a little bit. The number 12 is a very significant number. We find it often. There's 12 months, there's 12 tribes, there's 12 hours in the day. Why do we keep coming across the number 12? The answer is because the energy that creates the world comes from the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. And the name Yud Kei Vav Kei can be scrambled, rearranged in 12 different ways. In other words, generally a word that has 2 letters can be scrambled in 2 ways. We have a word Av, Aleph Beis, so you can make out of it 2 words. You can make Aleph Beis is Av, Father, and Beis Aleph is Ba, to come. If you have a word with 3 letters, it can be scrambled 6 different ways. If you have a word with 4 letters, it can be scrambled 24 different ways. But if 2 of the letters are the same, as it is in the case of Yud Kei Vav Kei, that cuts your options down to 12. So Yud Kei Vav Kei has 12 different options of how it's going to be scrambled. And because the energy that creates the world comes from the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, and it can be scrambled 12 different ways, that's why we keep coming across the number 12, corresponding to the 12 different forms of energy that come into the world. So you have 12 months of the year, starting from the month of Nisan, which is when the energy is organized, Yud Kei Vav Kei, first the Yud, then the Hey, then the Vav, then the Hey. As in the pasuk Yismachu Hashamayim V'Sogel Ha'aretz, that's the energy coming into the month of Nisan. Each month has a different arrangement of the letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei connecting with it. Yeah, the Kisvei Harizal talks about it. The same thing is true about the 12 Shvatim, the 12 tribes. So you have the 12 tribes are organized in such a manner that each tribe corresponds to one of the 12 combinations of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 12 hours of the day. Famous story, the Alter Rebbe was in prison, and he was kept in a cell where there was no access to daylight, there were no windows, there was only a candle. So he couldn't really tell apart the days and the nights except by what he was told by his captors. And at one time, someone came in, and so one of the ministers came into the Alter Rebbe and said to him, "Why aren't you sleeping? It's past midnight." The Alter Rebbe said, "It happens to be 5 minutes after 2 in the afternoon." So he said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because the energy that gives life to the world comes through the 12 combinations of Yud Kei Vav Kei. One who is in touch with one is sensitive to the combinations of divine energy that give life to the world can always know the time, because it goes according to the combinations of Yud Kei Vav Kei." So that's how we knew that it says the 12 hours of the day are the 12 combinations of Yud Kei Vav Kei. The 12 hours of the night are the 12 combinations of Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud, Shem, Adonai. So if you're in touch with that divine energy, you can always know the time. In any case, the 12 months and the 12 tribes and the 12 hours are in some way connected. So the 2 last months of the year, Shvat and Adar, correspond to the 2 last Shvatim, Yosef and Binyamin. So Binyamin's connection to Adar is quite straightforward, because Adar is the month of Purim, and Mordechai and Esther both come from the tribe of Binyamin. Well, what's the connection of Yosef to the month of Shvat? So, simply speaking, the word Yosef means to add, to increase. Yosef Hashem li bein acher, Rachel said when he was born. Hashem increased for me another son. So the word Yosef means to increase. And we know that the trees are unique in the fact that they always grow. An animal and a human being, lahavdil, grow only during their infantile state. Once they reach maturity, they stop growing. But a plant, especially a tree, keeps growing. So the idea of Yosef Haisaf, a continuous increase, is alluded to in a tree. So the new year for the trees is in the month of Shvat. Whether you go according to Beis Shammai, which says it's the first day of the month of Shvat, which is the beginning of the month of Shvat, Rosh Chodesh is the day that includes the entire month in it. Or you go according to Beis Hillel, which says the 15th of Shvat, and the 15th of the month is the Kaim Asira Bashlemus, is the full moon of the month, the fullness of the month, when the month is expressed in its full intensity. So in any case, it's in the month of Shvat, which is the month of Yosef. Yosef means increase, growing. And trees continuously grow. And the man is compared to a tree. So the character trait that we learn from a tree, we're inspired by a tree, we're guided by a tree to try and emulate, is the character of continuous growth. A person should never be satisfied with what he's already achieved and always look to grow. Hashem in his kindness gives us another day, another month, another year. It's because we're meant to grow, we're not meant to be stagnant. And by a tree, we see not only that it continuously grows, but it also bears fruit. In other words, the manner in which it grows is also beneficial to others. It doesn't just stay within itself, but it bears fruit. As we know, the famous word from the Friedrich Rebbe said that the first mitzvah in the Torah is pru'urvu, be fruitful and to multiply. Why is it the first mitzvah in the Torah? Because a Yid has to know, the first thing a Yid has to know is a Yid has to make another Yid. Can't be satisfied just by staying within yourself. A Yid has to reach out and make another Yid. So the idea of the growth should be in such a manner that it bears fruit, that inspires others. And the fruits have seeds within them. And the seeds can be used to plant new trees, which will also grow, which will also bear fruit, which will also have seeds in them, which will be planted to plant new trees. So the idea is that a Yid has to know that he needs to grow continuously in his connection to Hashem. He needs to grow in such a manner that will not only be a benefit for himself, but also a benefit for others, as the Rebbe points out in the Maimer Basi Lagani. That it says about Avraham Avinu, Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem Kel Olam, that Avraham called in the name of Hashem, the God of the world. And our sages say, Chachamim say, Al Tikra Vayikra Ela Vayakri. Don't read the word Vayikra. He called, but Vayakri, he called others to call. He inspired others to call. And that is a very, very basic part of the growth that is expected of a Yid. Is not only he should grow in a way that is beneficial to himself, but he should grow in a way that's beneficial also to those around him, and will inspire those around him, and inspire those around him in such a manner that those around him should become inspirers. They shouldn't just be beneficiaries of the inspiration. They should take that inspiration and pass it on to others who will in turn pass it on to others. And in this way, there's an endless productivity, an endless positive energy that inspires and passes, continues, goes on. And all this is connected with the idea of what we can learn from the trees. And this is the idea of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, the new year for the trees. Of course.
I understand that in the Northern Hemisphere, it's a new year, everything starts growing. How does one explain it to somebody who works in Southern, where everything's still in the sea?
Okay, so the question was, let me just repeat for the people listening on the Zoom. The question was, this all makes sense in the Northern Hemisphere, where the calendar is structured in such a way. But what about in the Southern Hemisphere? How does one explain it to this? In the Southern Hemisphere, where the world is just falling asleep at this time of year? So, first of all, the simple answer is that we go according to the seasons in Eretz Yisro. And in Eretz Yisro, the seasons work out in such a way that it's a new year for the trees now. Now, also, what exactly is the meaning of the new year for the trees, and why is there a machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether it's Rosh Chodesh or it's Chamisha Asar? So one of the explanations is that on Rosh Hashanah we're judged. So the new energy and the new that comes into the world is launched on Rosh Hashanah. It takes 4 months for from when the rain begins to become absorbed in the roots of the tree until it travels up the roots and up the branches, up the trunk, and is able to affect the sap in the tree to the point where it benefits the fruits, is a process of 4 months. The question is, when do you count the 4 months from? So generally, we know that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel have an ongoing machlekes throughout the Shas, whether we focus on the potential or the real, the practical. So, for example, one of the famous machlekes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is on Chanukah. Do you start with lighting 1 candle and work your way up to 8, or do you start with 8 and work your way down to 1? And the explanation for the reasons of that is, although they give reasons, but the reason behind it is that Beis Shammai looks at Beis Shammai looks at the potential, and on the first day of Chanukah, there's potentially 8 days. The second day, there's only potentially 7 days. The third day is potentially 6 days. Beis Hillel focuses on what we actually have in real time, what we actually have. So the first day we actually have 1 day. The second day we have 2 days. The third day we have 3 days. And until the 8th day, we actually have 8 days. So similarly over here, on Rosh Hashanah, the whole world is judged. But on Sukkot, there's a special judgment for water. That's why we say Hashainas on Sukkot. So there's a general judgment, and then it's brought down more specifically on the specific date in which we're judged for that specific matter. So in a general sense, in a potential sense, all the blessings for the year come from Rosh Hashanah. But in a more specific sense, when it comes to rain, it comes from Sukkot. So Beis Shammai counts the 4 months from Rosh Hashanah, therefore it's the first of Shvat. And Beis Hillel counts the 4 months from Sukkot, and therefore it's the 15th of Shvat. Along those lines, that would apply everywhere in the world equally, because everywhere in the world we're judged on Rosh Hashanah. If that helps. Anyway, the other big event this week is it's Parshas Yisro, and Aseres HaDibros are coming up this Shabbos. The great revelation at Sinai, Vayeded Hashem al Har Sinai, the Almighty Himself descended upon Mount Sinai, and the entire Jewish people, men, women, and children, including the souls of future generations, were present and heard these great divine revelation, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Anochi, coming from the very essence of Hashem. Our sages teach us that the word Anochi is a acronym of Rashi Tevis, Anon, Nafshi, Ksavis, Yehavis. The Almighty says, I have taken my very self, and I've written it into the Torah, and I've given it over to you. So when I give you the Torah, I'm not just giving you the Torah, I'm giving you myself. As we say, in Tanya we pointed out, and we say this every day in the Shemona Esrei, so the simple meaning is, you, Hashem, have given us. What have you given us? The first thing on the list is Teiras Chaim, a Torah of life. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya points out that there's a deeper way of understanding this. What have you given us? The first thing on the list is Hashem Elokeinu. You've given us yourself. You've given us Hashem. Because the Torah is one with Hashem. So when Hashem gave us the Torah, He gave us Himself in the Torah. And when a Jew studies Torah, lives by the Torah, he's taking Hashem Himself. You're taking me. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya the Zohar, which says on the pasuk, "V'yikhu li truma," that truma they should take for me. Truma. So this truma is Torah mem, the Torah which was given in 40 days. So if that's the case, he says it should have said "V'yikhu li," it should take me, utruma and Torah. Why isn't there a vav between the li and the truma? So the reason is because it's kul echad, because it's all one. Because the Almighty and the Torah are absolutely one thing, and you don't put in an and between the same thing. So Hashem is giving Himself in the Torah. I have taken my very self, written it into the Torah, and passed it on to you. And this Anochi is Elokecha. It's thy God. Hashem is speaking to every Jew as an individual, not just in the general sense, your God in the plural, Elokechem, but Elokecha in the singular. And Chazal say that when the Jewish people standing in Matan Torah, every single individual felt that imi hadibur medaber, that the Hashem is speaking to me individually. It's one Hashem, one Torah, and one recipient. Each Yid felt that he was the unique recipient of the Torah. Hashem was speaking to him individually. It's not just that we happen to be standing there, we happen to be part of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people as a whole received the Torah, and therefore we are also incumbent to come upon us to keep it. But rather, the entire Torah is given to me as an individual. That was the experience of Matan Torah. Now, about the voice of Matan Torah, there is a pasuk in Parshas Vayeschanan where the Aseres HaDibros are repeated a second time. that describes the voice of Matan Torah. And the lashon of the pasuk is right after the Aseres Hadibros in Parshas V'Eschan, and immediately after the Aseres Hadibros, the pasuk says, "Es hadvarim ha'ela diber Hashem el kol kahalchem." These words Hashem spoke to your entire community. Mitoich ha'esh ha'anon v'ha'rafel, from amidst the fire, the cloud, and the thick fog. Koil gadol, a great voice, v'lo yasaf, that did not cease. That's the lashon of pasuk. Koil gadol v'lo yasaf, a great voice that did not cease. And the question, of course, is what is meant by this? What's the greatness of the voice, and what does it mean it didn't cease? So the Medrash in this week's Seder, in connection with Haseres Hadibros, the Medrash brings this pasuk and gives three interpretations. The first interpretation is, it was a great voice, and from this voice, all the prophets prophesied, and all the sages throughout the generations. It was all from this voice. That's the first interpretation. The second interpretation is, it was a kol echad, was one voice, shenechlak was zayin kolos, which was divided into 7 voices, and that divided into 70 languages. So, simply speaking, by Matan Torah, the Jewish people heard the Torah given to them in 70 languages. First translation of the Chumash, it's given to Matan Torah by Hashem himself. The third interpretation is Koil Gadol V'lo Yasaf, was a great voice that did not cease. Says the Medrash, Shelo Yehoyo Lo Baska. There was no echo. Normally, a great voice would have an echo. Here, something phenomenal happened. There was a great voice, but no echo. So all these three interpretations need to be understood. What exactly is the Medrash trying to tell us? What can we learn from it? And the most puzzling of the three is the third. A great voice without an echo. Why does the fact that a voice doesn't have an echo make it a great voice? And how does that mean it didn't cease? Normally, the greater the voice, the greater the echo. The more impressive the voice, the more impressive the echo. So if it was a great voice, you would expect a great echo. Here, it seems to be some kind of a miracle that despite the fact it was a great voice, and it was in the desert where there are mountains all over the place, and it makes sense that there would be an echo. Nevertheless, there wasn't an echo. So the question is, why would Hashem have made such a miracle that the voice of Matan Torah shouldn't have an echo? We know, like, the Almighty doesn't make miracles for nothing. Everything has a purpose. Hashem created the world to conduct itself according to the rules of nature, and when the rules of nature are suspended or superseded, there must be a reason for it. And the most important question is, what is there in us for us to learn from it? As we know, Torah is not a storybook. Torah is a book of instruction, guidance. So if the Torah tells us that the voice of Matan Torah didn't have an echo, it's not only to impress us, it's also to teach us something. So let's go back to the first interpretation. First interpretation was that the great voice that did not cease was that from this voice extended itself all the prophecies of the prophets and all the teachings of the sages. It was all from this voice. What does that mean? What does that tell us? So I mentioned before that Haseres Hadibros were given by Hashem himself. Hashem says, I take my very essence written into the Torah and handed it over to you. And he gave it to every Jew individually. So someone might think, yes, that is true about the Haseres Hadibros. But what about the rest of Chumash? Maybe the rest of Chumash is, first of all, it's very holy, very special, but it's the essence of Hashem. The essence of Hashem, it's enough to say the Haseres Hadibros are the essence of Hashem. And it's given to every Jew as an individual. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, speak to the sons of Israel collectively. It's every Jew individually. I mean, of course, it's incumbent upon every Jew because we're part of Klal Yisro. But not that it was given to me as an individual. Hashem says, my entire focus is that you should put up a mezuzah. My entire focus is that you should bench when you finish eating. My entire focus is that you should light Shabbos candles. My entire focus is that you should eat kosher. Can you say that about the whole Torah? And especially when it comes to the prophets. What about Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim, Cheskel, Yirmiyah, Yeshaya, Tzrei, and the Ksuvim? And what about Torah Shabbal Peh? What about the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Zohar, the Medrash? Everything that's written from the Chachamim, from the oral Torah. Is that also included in this? It's also the essence of Hashem being transmitted to every Jew as an individual. So the Medrash says, yes, Kol Gadol, the voice of Matan Torah was a great voice. V'lo Yosef, it didn't cease. It didn't stop just with the Aseres HaDibros. It continued through the whole Chumash, through the whole Nevi'im, the whole Ksuvim, the whole and the Medrash, the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Zohar, all of Torah. It's all part of that incredible voice of Aseres HaDibros, which was the transmission of the essence of Hashem to every single Jew. So whatever part of Torah we study, what we're studying is one with Hashem Himself, as the Zohar says, the Torah and the Almighty are absolutely one, and it's given to every Jew as an individual. The second interpretation is that it was one voice that was split into 7 voices, that was split into 70 languages. What does that mean? So, first and simplest way of understanding it, what's 70 languages for? Who needs 70 languages? The Jewish people who speak the Holy Tongue. 70 languages are for the Gentiles, for the nations of the world. Was Torah given for the nations of the world? Torah was given for the Jewish people. But we know that Torah also includes the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 Noachite laws. The 7 laws that are incumbent upon all of mankind. They were given to Adam Rishon and later to Noach in the full list, that all of mankind should follow these 7 mitzvahs. And Moshe Rabbeinu, when he received the Torah for the Jewish people, also received the instruction that the Jewish people should pass on to the Gentiles the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And at the time when the Jewish people are in a position of power, they should enforce the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And when they're not in a position of power, they should inspire people around them to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and to keep it because it's part of the Torah. Because it's part of the Torah that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. So the Torah didn't just remain in Lashon HaKodesh, the voice didn't just remain in Lashon HaKodesh, but it extended itself also in other languages, because it also includes the obligation, the commandment that all inhabitants of the earth should keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Shgacha Pratis, I just heard on a recording of a young man from our community, actually, Mordechai Rubin from Edgeworth. He's living in America now, and he opened up the Senate, the New York State Senate session last week, they always have a clergyman opening with a prayer. So he gave the opening prayer, and he spoke about the obligation of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, brought it out, articulated it beautifully, went through all the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and I spoke about the privilege that the legislature has to see to it that the inhabitants of the state should be guided by the 7 Noachite laws. He spoke about Yud Shvat while he was at it, about Friedrich and about the Rebbe, and the responsibility that we have to see to it that the world it should be a garden, and Basi Lagani. So the Torah doesn't just stick with Lashon Kodesh, which pertains to the Jewish people, but also extends itself to 70 languages, because you have the mitzvahs of B'nai Noach as well. On top of that, we know that, I think we talked about it last week, that everything has sparks of Kedusha. Every physical object has sparks of Kedusha. And we have our task is to redeem those sparks and elevate them and connect them with Hashem, bring them back to their source and even higher than their source. So this is also true about the languages. All the 70 languages contain within themselves sparks of holiness, sparks of godliness. And when we use one of the 70 languages in our service of Hashem, either through engaging in our business in those languages, and the purpose of engaging in the business is to make a profit which will be used in order to live a life of Yiddishkeit, in order to teach our children Torah, in order to keep Shabbat, to make Shabbos, to be Machnas Eirach, to invite guests, and to fulfill them, give tzedakah, and to fulfill Hashem's mitzvahs. So when we use one of the 70 languages with the purpose of serving Hashem with it, we take the sparks of Kedusha that are contained within that language, and we elevate it to Kedusha. How much more so when we actually study Torah in one of those languages? Like right now, we're studying Torah in English. And the sages of the Talmud taught Torah in Aramaic. Many tzaddikim over the ages taught Torah in Yiddish and in Ladino and in Judeo-Arabic, that Rambam wrote most of his books. So when you teach Torah or study Torah in one of the other 70 languages, one can question, okay, so when you study Torah in the Holy Tongue, it's still part of that voice of Aseres HaDibros. But what about if you teach Torah in other languages? Does it still have that intense holiness, of being one, the essence of Hashem, and giving and being communicated to every Jew individually. So the Medrash says yes. It's a Koil Gadol. It was a great voice, but Lo Yasaf. It didn't cease just with Lashon Kodesh. It extended itself into all 70 languages. So when Yidden are learning Torah in whichever language they're learning, this Torah is one with Hashem Himself. So that takes it to another level. And the third interpretation is Koil Gadol V'Lo Yasaf was a great voice that didn't cease. The Medrash says that it didn't have an echo. What is the significance of it not having an echo? So we first have to figure out what's an echo in general. What's an echo? An echo is a rebounding sound. So if you throw a ball against the wall, it bounces back. If you throw a sound against the wall or against a mountain or against a surface that doesn't absorb it, it bounces back, and that's the echo. And the louder the voice, the greater the echo will be. However, that's only the case if the surface deflects it and rejects it. But if the surface absorbs it, if you throw a ball against a sponge and the sponge absorbs the ball, it's not going to bounce back. So if the sound is absorbed by the surface, there's not going to be an echo. There's only an echo if the sound is deflected by the surface. So we know that what is the unique contribution of Matan Torah? Famous question. Avraham Avinu studied Torah, Yitzchak Avinu studied Torah, Yaakov Avinu studied Torah, Shevet Levi, Mitzrayim studied Torah. So if everybody was studying Torah all along, what's the big deal of Matan Torah? Why do we make such a big deal of Matan Torah? The Torah was given on Shavuos, we eat blintzes and cheesecake and make a big yom tov. What's the big deal? We had the Torah all along. So we all know the Medrash that is quoted again and again in Chassidus, that the Medrash says that there was a mashal of a king who had two countries, Rami and Syria, and he made a rule that the people from Rami can't descend to Syria and the people of Syria can't descend to Rami, a closed border. And then one day the king said, now I'm changing the rules. I'm opening the border and I'm allowing traffic to travel in either direction. And I'll be the first one to cross the border. To make that clear the distinction between the way it was until now and the way it's going to be now, I'm going to be the first one to cross the border. So says the Medrash, when Hashem created the world, He made a decree. Hashamayim shamayim l'Hashem, v'ha'aretz nasal l'vnei adam. Heaven is for man, and heaven is for God, for godliness and for spirituality, and earth is for humans. Earth is for the physical, and the spiritual can't descend to earth, and the physical can't rise up to heaven. And that continued to be the case until the Torah was given. And Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov performed mitzvahs, even though the mitzvahs they performed were holy, but the physical object with which the mitzvah was performed was not permeated with that kedusha. It didn't become holy. Physicality can't become holy. Physical is physical, and spiritual is spiritual. You can't mix the two. And when the Torah was given at Sinai, it was given from Anochi Hashem Elokecha, from the essence of Hashem. The essence of Hashem transcends the divide between the physical and the spiritual. So that empowered us to be able to use the Torah in such a manner that it should fully permeate the physical world and be able to elevate the physical world and make it holy. Like, for example, when you open up the Aron Kodesh, you see Sifrei Torah. And everybody rises and stands with the greatest reverence. What are the Sifrei Torah? The Sifrei Torah are made from the hide of an animal. Parchment made from the hide of an animal. How does it become so holy? Because Torah has the power to imbue everything with holiness, everything with godliness. Even a physical object, when it's used for a mitzvah, becomes holy. And that's only after the Torah was given. So in other words, the voice of Matan Torah penetrated every dimension of existence, be it physical or spiritual. Every fiber of existence in the world was permeated by the voice of Matan Torah. There wasn't anything that rejected it, that deflected it. And therefore, it wasn't a miracle that there was no echo. It was a perfectly natural phenomenon, because when is there an echo? There's only an echo if the surface rejects it. But if the surface absorbs it, there's no echo. So being that the entire world, every single fiber of existence, be it physical or spiritual, absorbed the voice of Matan Torah, that's why there was no echo. So it wasn't a miracle. It was a fact of life. And what is the lesson for us? The lesson for us is very powerful. The lesson for us is that our relationship with Torah and with mitzvahs needs to be done in such a way that Torah and mitzvahs doesn't remain some kind of a spiritual experience, and when we're praying and when we're studying Torah, we are connected with. It needs to be something that permeates every fiber of our being and every fiber of our existence. That there isn't anything in the world which isn't permeated with in our lives, that isn't permeated with Torah. As I say, Judaism is not a religion; it's a way of life. A religion would be some kind of a spiritual experience, good for praying. Yiddishkeit is something that's meant to permeate every fiber of our being, that when we live, when we eat, when we sleep, when we go about our business, when we exercise, when we shop, when we dress, it's all our connection with Hashem permeates every single fiber of our being and every fiber of existence. And that is a tremendous lesson to be taken from the fact that the voice of Matan Torah was Kol Gadol, such a great voice that Lo Yasaf, it didn't stop anywhere. There wasn't anything that deflected it. There wasn't anything that wasn't permeated by it. And therefore, our relationship with Torah and with Yiddishkeit also needs to be in such a manner that every single aspect of our existence and every single aspect of our lives is permeated with our relationship with Hashem. Yes?
When you do a mitzvah, and
when you do a mitzvah.
When one does a mitzvah.
Yeah.
One takes away the spark of Kedusha.
Kedusha that's in that physical thing.
So how come you do a mitzvah and you any object, anything, so it comes back, it gives a Kedusha.
Okay, so the question was, if you have a physical object and you do a mitzvah with it, so you're releasing the spark of Kedusha within it, you're elevating it. So what's the point of doing a mitzvah again with the same object? That's pretty much the question I'm hearing.
No, how come you say that? You know that the Kedusha comes into the object if we take out the...
Okay, so this is a complicated, I hear your question, this is a complicated business. Our understanding exactly, to be able to identify how sparks of Kedusha work is a little bit limited, but the question is a very interesting question. And the fact that the Torah obligates us to continue doing the mitzvah means that there's further potential that could be elevated and could be brought to its fullest capacity through the fulfillment of the mitzvah right now. So I don't understand exactly how the spark system works, and I wouldn't be able to identify exactly, how to get to where the spark is and how to get to it. And our task is to do what the Torah tells us to do. And when we do what the Torah tells us to do, we know that we're moving in the right direction and we're achieving what needs to be achieved.
That means we take the sparks out and then it's another store on the...
Maybe we can elevate the sparks even higher and yet higher. As long as the Torah is commanding us to do the mitzvah, we know that there's a tremendous achievement in that. And that achievement benefits us and it benefits the object that we, it's interesting, we say in benching, Mimarim Yolamdu Olav Ve'aleinu Schus Shetahelu Mishmer Shalom. So in some of the nuschais, it says Mimarim Yolamdu Aleihem Ve'aleinu. In our nusach, it says Mimarim Yolamdu Olav Ve'aleinu. So Aleinu is upon us, right? So marriage should be extended upon us. What does Olav mean? Upon him. What's upon him? Upon it. So one of the interpretations is that the it is the food. The food that we ate, and we ate it for the right purpose, is elevated, right? So we're praying that the food should be elevated correctly and used for the right purpose, and it should have the right schus to be elevated in the right way. It works both ways. When we are doing the right thing, then the things that we're using for the purpose of doing the right thing also get elevated, and we are elevated together with it. Because the sparks of Kedusha that there are in the physical things have a higher source even than the sparks of Kedusha within us. So we are benefiting from the rays of Kedusha that are generated by these sparks of Kedusha.
Let's say this high.
Right, so it says you don't go back there.
Was like,
right. So when the Torah tells us that the job is done in this manner, and you don't have to go back there, we know that as far as that's concerned, the job is done and we don't have to go back there. And the Torah tells us to continue doing this. For example, you have a lulav and an esrog, and the Torah says you should use it for 7 days. So even though you've benched lulav and esrog the first day and you've already taken out the sparks of Kedusha, nevertheless, we're commanded to go back the second day and the third day and the fourth day and the fifth day, except Shabbos, and do it again. So obviously there is still what to do, what to elevate, and we are benefiting from it and it's benefiting from us. Okay, we're going to move on to Tanya. So we're at the very end of the Hagdama. So I believe it's page Daled, the numbers on top of the page, and the numbers on the bottom of the page. It's Roman numerals, page 21, XXI. And we're at the very bottom of the page. The new paragraph starts with Vehine. So I mentioned when we started learning this introduction that the Alter Rebbe originally wrote the Tanya in manuscript form. He wasn't planning to print it. And because of certain circumstances, the Alter Rebbe was compelled to print it as a book. So in the introduction, there is the introduction as it was written as an introduction to the handwritten edition of the Tanya. And then this last paragraph was added in, adjusted for the printed edition of the Tanya. So everything we learned until now applies to both the handwritten edition and the printed edition. The Alter Rebbe is saying that I'm writing down all the advice, all the counsel, all the guidance that I've given to people in Yechidus, and I want it to be available to everyone. It should not have to come and ask me because it's all there. That applies both to the handwritten edition as well as to the published edition. But it was written as an introduction to the handwritten edition. Now he continues, and this is added in for the printed edition. Hine achash and ispashtu, the last 2 lines on the page. I think Mrs. Morris, I don't know if you have the right page there. Dalwood on top of the page. Okay, you're anticipating what's coming. Very good. I just saw that the page doesn't look like the page that. Very good. After these notebooks, manuscript notebooks have been spread amongst all members of our community, many copies. Now, the way copies worked in those days was didn't stick it into a copy machine. You didn't press a button on the computer and you press print and a sefer came out. But rather, it had to be written over by hand. There were scribes that wrote it over again and again. So after all these copies were made by various scribes, seifrim shonim, various scribes, umishunim, and strange scribes. And I've mentioned this before, that the problem which actually led the Alter Rebbe to be compelled to print the Tanya was that because the Tanya was in manuscript form and it was being copied over by hand, so there was an opportunity for his opponents to take advantage of this vulnerability and copy over the Tanya with intentional mistakes. And intentional mistakes in sensitive areas that will discredit the validity of the book. And that caused problems. So the Hasidim prevailed upon the Alter Rebbe to agree to publish the Tanya so that there should be one standard text. And you know that anything that deviates from the standard text is not correct, is not real. So because the manuscript was copied over by various scribes, because there were so many different because there were so many different copies, so the mistakes became a great many mistakes, tremendous amount of mistakes, including, as I said before, mistakes that were put in intentionally to discredit the time. And therefore, the people whose names are mentioned earlier in the Haskamas of Yehuda Leib HaKohen, he mentions the names of the publishers that committed themselves both financially and with their efforts to publish the Tanya, to exert themselves bodily and financially, to bring these notebooks, these manuscripts to print, cleansed from any sig. Sig means schmutz, dirt, which is that which was stuck in, what didn't belong there at all. The tov sofrim is mistakes that happen inadvertently. People try to copy over. Nothing is perfect, and you try to copy over, sometimes make mistakes. Umugoim hativ, and they are, so they came to print by being checked over very well. Make sure that what goes to print is the correct version. And for the good work, I express my thanks. And since there's an explicit pasuk, cursed is the one who moves the boundaries of his friend. Literal meaning of the pasuk is that if you have two neighbors that have fields next to each other, and there's a boundary separating where Reuven's field ends and Shimon's field begins. So if Reuven gets up in the middle of the night and walks over to the boundary and moves it a few feet in his benefit, that's called masik v'odayehu, is moving the boundary of his neighbor. That is stealing. So the pasuk says, "Ar masik v'odayehu," cursed is the one who moves the boundary of his friend. but it also implies the prohibition against illegal competition. You have a business, and your friend has a business, you're selling the same product, and you do something to put the other fellow out of business so that your business can grow at the expense of the other person. So there are certain situations where that's permissible, and if you do it in a legal way. If you do it in an illegal way, that's forbidden, and that is extended the pasuk Orer Masik Vurayeh. This also spills over into the copyright issue. That if somebody invests into printing a book and puts effort in and puts money in, and then when the book is done, you come along and you reprint it without all the effort that was put into it, and you sell it at a discounted price and put the other guy out of business. That's also a form of hasagas gevul. It's also a form of this moving of the boundaries, which is forbidden. So, being that the pasuk explicitly says "Order masik v'odayehu," cursed is one who engages in this illegal competition. The order by klala by nidich hasv'shalom. When the Torah uses the word "order," cursed be, it includes both a curse and an excommunication, etc. Al kain, therefore, ki Yehuda v'eit l'kra. Like Yehuda is an extra support for the pasuk. So this is an idiom, an expression that comes from a Talmudic passage. The Gemara in Kedushin discusses the various expressions that are valid for Kedushin. A man says to a woman, "Hareyat mekudeshesli, hareyat meuresesli," various expressions that are valid for Kedushin. So then the Kedushin is valid. If he uses an expression that is completely not relevant to marriage, the Kedushin is not valid. So the Gemara talks about what happens if he says, "Hareyat charufasi." So what does charufasi mean? So the Gemara says, first of all, we find in the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, talks about the shivcha charufa. And the lashon in the pasuk is v'hi shivcha necherefes leish. The word necherefes over there means betrothed, although it's only used once in the whole Chumash, but it means betrothed. So we see clearly that in the Torah the word charufa means betrothed. So if a man says to a woman areyat charufasi, it's considered a valid lashon of kedusha. And then the Gemara says, ve'oid, in addition to that, shekhem b'Yehuda koirim la'arusa charufa. In the land of Yehuda, which is the south of Eretz Yisrael, they refer to a betrothed woman as a charufa. So in common talk, in certain parts of Eretz Yisrael, the word charufa is also used to describe betrothal. So therefore, the word charufasi is a valid expression of betrothal. So the Gemara asks, Yehuda va'et l'kra, if you have a pasuk, what do you need Yehuda? Why should the custom in Yehuda be of interest to me if I already have a pasuk? So that became coined as a phrase, Yehuda va'et l'kra. Whenever you have a pasuk and you add something more to the pasuk, it's called ki Yehuda va'et l'kra. Just like in the Gemara brings a custom from Yehuda as an extra support for the pasuk. Says the Alter Rebbe over here also. I have a pasuk that says Orer Masik Vurayeh, that cursed be one who engages in illegal competition. So if somebody will make shtick over here on the copyright issue, he's included in that pasuk. But nevertheless, I will put my 2 cents in over here as well as an extra support. As Yehuda gives extra support to the pasuk, I will come along to put up a big wall, meaning a big prohibition. I'll call them atfisim against all publishers, not to dare publish these notebooks, these manuscripts, not by themselves, and not through their arrows, meaning their agents. Just like an arrow, as you shoot an arrow, the arrow becomes your agent to cause damage. Some people know how to stay behind the scenes, but they shoot arrows. They make sure that the troublemakers are there where they don't need to be. So not by themselves and not through their agents, built in Rishus HaNekuvim Anal without the explicit permission of the people whose names I mentioned in the previous Haskama. This prohibition extends itself for 5 years from the day that the printing is completed. And I pointed out in previous times that the Rebbe understands this to mean not only from the original print, but also from any time that the Tanya is printed with permission from those that have the right to print it, that this prohibition extends itself for 5 years from there. And since the Tanya is continuously being reprinted, so it has to be printed only with specific permission from those that have the rights to print it. This is one of the reasons why in the beginning of the Tanya, you have printed various contracts where the rights for the printing of the Tanya was sold from one publisher to another, until eventually it was sold to the Rebbe Rashab for the benefit of Ten Shemimim, and today it's on the right of the Hus and the Eitzer Achsidim, And anyone who wants to print the Tanya has to have explicit permission from those who have the right to print it. Otherwise, he's violating all these prohibitions. For those that hearken, those that listen, those that cooperate, it will be sweet. The Tavei Birch is Tov, and they'll be blessed with blessings of goodness. All this is the words of the compiler of this compilation of sayings, as we pointed out in previous Shiur, that the Alter Rebbe, in his humility, did not refer to himself as the author, but rather the compiler, meaning that he didn't introduce anything really new over here. He just compiled what has already been written in the writings of our sages, and the teachings of the written is the Svarim, refers to, as I said before, the Rambam, Maral of Prague, and the Shalah, from whose teachings the Alter Rebbe gleaned, and the Mipi Seifrim is the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritcher Maggid, who the Alter Rebbe learned from their teachings from the Mezritcher Maggid. The Alter Rebbe learned directly from the Maggid, and the Maggid taught him the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So the Alter Rebbe put together, what compiled in Tanya, a guide for the service of Hashem based primarily on the teachings of the Rambam, the Maral of Prague, the Shalah, Baal Shem Tov, and the Mezritcher Maggid. Moving on now to Perek Aleph. Chapter 1 finally arrived. That's page Hey in the Hebrew and page 2 in the English. One.
Can I just ask something? Oh.
Of course.
Thank you. Regarding the Alter Rebbe using the expression compiling, it has sometimes been an issue because rather than it being an original work, people I've engaged in conversations where people use that as an excuse to take away the validity of Tanya. How would you debate that? Like, what would you say rather than the Alter Rebbe saying, creating, but the compilation, it really does take away its. Do you know what I'm saying? It's uniqueness.
I hear what you're saying. I don't see why that's, unless somebody's looking to cause trouble. I can't see why anybody would have a problem with that. The Alter Rebbe is basically saying like this: I'm giving you a guide to life, to the service of Hashem, which is based on the teachings of the Rambam, the Maral Prague, the Shalah, the Baal Shem Tov, and the Maggid. And I'm putting it together in such a manner that it should be relevant to you in every detail of your life, and you can gain inspiration from every word of this book. So because it's based on the teachings of the Rambam and the Maral Prague and the Shalah and the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, that makes it any less valid. And it's also based on Chumash and Mishnayos and Gemara and Zohar. Does that take anything away from it? If anything, it only adds to its validity.
That's true. Well, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Perek Aleph. Tanya B'Seif Perek Gimel Denida. Chapter 1. We studied in a Baraisa. A Baraisa is a Tanaic manuscript. The writings of the Tanoim, the sages of the Mishnah. There are some manuscripts of the Tanoim that were included in the Mishnah, and there are some manuscripts that remained outside of the framework of the Mishnah. So those that remained outside of the framework of the Mishnah are referred to as baraisas. The word baraisa means out, and the word levar means outside. You have that which was included inside the structure of the Mishnah, and that which remained outside of the structure of the Mishnah. And the Gemara, these baraisas are quoted left, right, and center, and assembled in the Gemara.
Why was some of them left outside?
So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, when the question that was just asked was, why were some of them left out of the structure of the Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had a very big task to do. When he compiled the Mishnah, he had to compile it in an orderly fashion, in a way that would benefit all the students of Torah Shabbal Peh. This is the first time that Torah Shabbal Peh was written on an official basis. And he had to choose very carefully what to include and what not to include. When he didn't include something, doesn't mean it wasn't valid. Just meant that it wasn't necessary for the basic structure of an outline that would include Torah Shabbal Peh, a basic outline of Torah Shabbal Peh. So there are many times that a Mishnah and a Braisa say similar things. The Braisa is just a little bit more a lengthy expression. Sometimes there are additional opinions brought in the Braisa that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi didn't feel were necessary to include in the Mishnah because he didn't think the halacha was that way. Although he brings opinions in the Mishnah which are not la halacha as well. So he had a big task to figure out exactly how to put it all together. So Tanya, we learned in Abraisa V'Seif Perek Gimel Denida in the end of the third chapter of the tractate Nida. So the first point to mention over here is that if you open up a Gemara in the end of the third chapter of Nida that the Rebbe is referencing to, it doesn't use the word Tanya. Over there it says, Darash Reb Simloi. Reb Simloi taught. And it gives the whole teaching of Reb Simloi, which includes the statement that the Alter Rebbe is going to quote. So who was Reb Simloi? There are questions. The Alter Rebbe, Reb Simloi, according to some opinions, was a Tana. He was one of the sages of the epic of the Mishnah, and therefore his teaching would be described as a Baraisa. Or Reb Simloi, according to other opinions, was an Amayre. He was one of the sages of the Gemara. And therefore it's questionable how appropriate it would be to describe his teachings as Tanya, we learned in the Baraisa, not in the Baraisa, it's in the Gemara. So obviously the Alter Rebbe is of the opinion that Reb Simloi that is being quoted over here in the Gemara was a Tana, and you could describe it as Tanya. Maybe the Alter Rebbe even had a version of the Gemara where it introduced it as Tanya. But the most commonly known version of the Gemara, as printed in the Vilna Shas, doesn't say Tanya. And it's a bit peculiar why the Alter Rebbe would introduce this with a word which is controversial. He could have said, Isa b'seif perigim. We learned in the third chapter of Masechta Nida. Doesn't have to necessarily introduce it with the word Tanya. And the fact that he does introduce it with the word Tanya, it's very clear that this was specifically intended so. So why does he want to begin the book with the word Tanya? And we see that that's the name that stuck. When you talk to people about studying this book, you don't refer to it as Lekutei Amarim or so much, even Sefer Shalbeinim so much. It's normally referred to as Tanya. So the fact that the first word of the book is Tanya seems to be a very specific and intentional nature. So one of the explanations on this is that it says that there is a klipa, there's a negative force called Tanya. And the Zohar, the Idra Rabba, which is one of the important parts of the Zohar, starts with the word Tanya. And the explanation over there is given that there's a klipa called Tanya. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai began the Idra with the word Tanya in order to counteract this negative force. Now, if that's the case, and for the same reason, the Alter Rebbe wanted to start his Sefer with the word Tanya. Now, if that's the case, you might ask, the Mishnah should start with the word Tanya, the Gemara should start with the Tanya, maybe the Chumash should start with the word Tanya. Why only these Svarim? So the answer is that this klipa, this negative force called Tanya, its primary function is to dissuade people from learning the inner esoteric part of Torah. And it's found that primarily amongst Torah scholars. They are infected with this sometimes. And the way to counteract this force, this energy, which is dissuading people from learning the esoteric part of Torah, is with this power called Tanya. Tanya is the counter, the antidote to the klipa called Tanya. Therefore, the Zohar, which is basic work of Pnimius HaTorah, of the inner esoteric part of Torah, and the Tanya, which is the Torah Shebeksav Chassidus, begin with the word Tanya to have this power that the Sefer has a koyach, has a power to counterbalance, be an antidote to this klipa called Tanya. That's one explanation. Another explanation is that we come across a concept called the Eson Shebeneshama. There's Eson, the power of Eson. Eson means hard and strong. As we find, so there's an element in the neshama of every single Jew, which is hard and strong, unbendable. A Yid is committed to Hashem, and nothing will bend him. And that is why we find that Yidden of all walks of life, when they were put to the test of Kiddush Hashem, of renouncing their role as Yidden, the connection to Yiddishkeit, embracing another religion, they stood firm and they said it's not something that we can do under any circumstances. We'd rather die than give up our connection to Yiddishkeit. So that comes from the Eson Shebeneshama, from this very, very powerful aspect of the Neshama. And this also explains why we find that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he negotiated with the Almighty that Hashem should forgive the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf, he said, Ki amkshe oirefu, because they're a stubborn-necked nation. You should forgive our sins and our intentional sins and our unintentional sins, and you should lead us. So the question is, Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to impress on Hashem that the Jewish people are worthy of forgiveness. So why is he mentioning the fact that they're a stubborn-necked nation? That's not a very big compliment. So the answer given in Chassidus is that the stubborn-necked nation over here is a reference to the fact that a Yid has an akshant, he has a stubbornness, strength, an absolute, non-negotiable stance when it comes to his connection to Hashem. He won't, under any circumstances, allow himself to be severed from Hashem. That's the Esan Sheben Neshama. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was referring to when he said, "Ki am she'erifu." Yidden are a stubborn-necked nation. They have that stubbornness. They definitely want to be connected to Hashem, and nothing in the world will budge them. So this is coming from the essence of the neshama, the chidush of a neshama. And the Alter Rebbe began the sefer with Tanya, which is the same letters as the word Esan. Tanya is Taf Nun Yud Aleph. I mentioned earlier in the Shiur about scrambling letters. So Esan is Aleph Yud Taf Nun. So the Alter Rebbe started the sefer with the word Tanya to allude to that in this sefer has the power to strengthen and to bring out and to support the Esan Sheben Neshama of every Yid. Not only the learning of the Sefer, but even the letters of the Sefer have that power. In fact, the Rebbe Rashab, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was learning to read as a child, the Rebbe Rashab instructed that he should practice his reading from the title page of Tanya. Because the letters of Tanya themselves have the power to strengthen the Esan Sheben Neshama, this power, this strength that there is within every Yid. Now, the letters Esan, interestingly enough, Aleph, Yud, Saf, Nun, are the four letters that are used to conjugate any verb in the Holy Tongue into future tense. So, for example, we're studying now, we'll use the verb lamoid to study, to learn. So if you want to say, I will study, it's elmad. You will study, it's tilmad. He will study, it's yilmad. We will study, it's nilmad. So the four letters, Aleph, Yud, Saf, Nun, are the letters that are added to make a verb future tense, which alludes to the fact that this power of Esan Sheben Neshama will be fully revealed in the future. Mashiach comes, the beauty of every single Yiddish Neshama in its full power. A Yid is hard and strong in his commitment to Hashem, and nothing will budge him. That will become fully revealed when Mashiach comes. But the study of the Tanya is a support to help us get a taste of what it's going to be like when Mashiach comes, to help the Neshama experience a little bit of that. So that's where, therefore, it has the letters Tanya, the letters Esan, implying that the Tanya has the power to support and reveal and strengthen that capacity within every single Yid. Now, just the brackets, it says B'soif Perek Gimel Denida. I'm going to conclude with the Hillel Parashah, great chassid of the middle Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. He writes, and the Rebbe actually quotes him in his notes on Tanya, his Rishimus on Tanya. He says like this. He says that the word Nida is a reference to Golus. It says in Eicha that the Jewish people at the time of the destruction became like a Nida. So it's a reference to Golus. Now, in the tractate Chulin, it talks about the laws of kashrus, treif and kosher. It talks about the leg of the anatomy of an animal, because if there's certain injuries in an animal make the animal treif, certain don't. So it talks about the anatomy of an animal, and it talks about that the leg of a cow has three parts. Shloisha prakim berega. We have one knee. A cow has various joints that make it three parts. So the Perek Gimel means the lowest part, the last part. Nida means goes. So it's Tanya, the safe Perek Gimel, the Nida. When was the Tanya revealed? At the very end of the last chapter of Golos. In other words, the secrets of Torah are going to be fully revealed when Mashiach comes. As it says in Shirashirim, Yishakeni Mishikas Pihu, he will kiss us from the kisses of his mouth. And Rashi says, this is a reference to the secrets of the reasons of the mitzvahs that will be taught when Mashiach comes. But the teachings of Chassidus are a foretaste to that revelation, and that comes the Seif Perek Gimel Denida at the very end of the last chapter of Golos. So this is when we need that special reinforcement to be able to deal with the darkness of the last chapter of Golos, which is a special darkness, and for this we need a special light to be able to combat it. And this was given to us as a gift in the teachings of Chassidus, the basis of which is the backbone of it all is Tanya. Therefore, Tanya begins with the words Tanya b'seif Perek Gimel Denida. We'll hold it over there.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.